The morning of February 20th, 1945. Hill 362 Alpha, northern sector of Iwo Jima. Private First Class Anthony Caserta pressed himself against the volcanic rock as machine gun fire tore through the air above his position. His M2 flamethrower, 70 pounds of steel tanks and pressurized fuel strapped to his back, made him a marked man. The Japanese had already learned to identify the flamethrower operators by their distinctive silhouettes, and enemy mortars seemed to follow them like vengeful spirits across the black sand. Through the acrid smoke drifting across the broken terrain, Caserta could see the objective. Another cave entrance, one of hundreds honeycombing this nightmare island. Dark, silent, waiting. Inside that volcanic cavity sat Japanese soldiers who would fight until incineration or death claimed them. No surrender, no retreat, just this. An 8-square-mile fortress that American planners had assured the Marines would fall in 5 days. They were now on day 2, and already the casualty reports suggested something had gone catastrophically wrong with those estimates. The pre-invasion bombardment, 74 consecutive days of naval shelling and aerial bombing, the longest preliminary assault in Pacific War history, had supposedly destroyed the island's defences. Yet from the moment the first wave hit the beaches at 0900 the previous morning, Marines had died in numbers that shocked even hardened commanders who had fought across Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan. This wasn't supposed to happen. The battle plan, crafted by strategists studying reconnaissance photographs and Japanese defensive doctrine, anticipated beach fortifications, banzai charges, perhaps a week of moderate resistance before the rising sun flag came down. Instead, the Marines had walked into a killing ground unlike anything they had experienced, and at the heart of this carnage lay a technological and tactical revolution that would redefine close-quarters combat for generations to come. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had spent 9 months transforming Iwo Jima into something unprecedented in military history, an underground fortress designed not to win, but to kill. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The question confronting every Marine crawling across that volcanic wasteland was not whether they would capture the island, but how many of them would die doing it. And the answer, as Caserta and 26,000 other assault troops were discovering, depended largely on a weapon most had never seen before. The mechanized flamethrower tank, a Sherman modified with 300 gallons of napalm and a range of 400 feet. 8 of these machines had landed the previous day. Marines initially regarded them as experimental curiosities. Within hours, they would become the most requested weapon in the entire operation. But before we can understand why flamethrower tanks became essential to victory, we must first comprehend the fortress they were designed to destroy. They designed tunnel systems at multiple levels, with sophisticated ventilation to minimize the effects of explosives. Chambers would be reinforced with concrete salvaged from demolished surface structures. Positions would be mutually supporting, connected by tunnels that would allow troops to shift between strongpoints without exposure to American firepower. By the time Kuribayashi finished, his engineers had carved 11 miles of tunnels into the volcanic rock. Mount Suribachi, the 556-foot dormant volcano dominating the island's southern tip, contained 7 levels of fortified positions connected by tunnels and stairways. The northern sector, where the terrain rose into a series of rocky plateaus and deep ravines, became the main defensive zone with 1,500 rooms, ammunition storage, command posts, hospitals, and fighting positions all linked underground. Every cave entrance and tunnel exit was positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire. Machine gun nests were camouflaged with volcanic rock and ash. Artillery pieces, including coastal defense guns and anti-aircraft weapons, repurposed as direct fire weapons, were concealed in concrete bunkers, with embrasures barely large enough for the barrels. Spider, traps, one-man fighting holes covered with volcanic rock dotted the terrain, invisible until a Marine stepped within killing distance. Into this fortress, Kuribayashi packed 21,000 men, infantry from the 109th Division, artillery units, anti-aircraft crews, naval infantry, and the 26th Tank Regiment's 13 vehicles, which Kuribayashi ordered buried hull-deep as stationary gun positions. He stockpiled ammunition and food sufficient for 2.5 months of sustained combat, anticipating that once the American fleet surrounded the island, no resupply would reach his garrison. Then he waited. American intelligence, observing the island through aerial reconnaissance, noted the extensive preparations but failed to comprehend their scale or sophistication. Photographs showed cratered landscapes from ongoing bombing raids, evidence that American bombs were finding targets. What they could not see was that most of Kuribayashi's defenders lived and fought from positions immune to aerial bombardment and naval shellfire. The stage was set for a collision between American operational assumptions and Japanese defensive innovation, between the doctrine of overwhelming firepower and the reality of an enemy who had learned to survive it. At Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, in the autumn of 1944, Colonel Howard Unmacht's secretive Flamethrower group worked against impossible deadlines. Navy Seabees from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion labored in workshops classified as top secret, modifying 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks into weapons unlike anything previously deployed in the Pacific War. The technical challenges were formidable. Machinists mate First Class A.A. Reicher and electricians mate Second Class Joseph Kissel designed the CBH-1 system that would replace each Sherman 75mm main gun with a flamethrower capable of projecting napalm-thickened fuel at 300 pounds per square inch of pressure. The installation required 150 pounds of welding rod per tank and 1,100 electrical connections. Each modification cost between $20,000 and $25,000 in 1944 currency, equivalent to nearly $300,000 today. The CBH-1 system operated through a pressurized fuel tank holding 290 gallons of napalm mixture. When the operator pressed the firing mechanism, compressed nitrogen forced the jellied gasoline through armored hoses and out a nozzle mounted where the main gun had been. The effective range was 400 feet, nearly 3 times the distance of the backpack flamethrowers that Marines had been using since Guadalcanal. The weapon could traverse 270 degrees, covering nearly a complete arc of fire without the tank needing to reposition. The system's firing duration depended on trigger discipline. A sustained burst could empty the tanks in approximately 80 seconds. Short bursts, the recommended tactical employment, could stretch the fuel supply to 20 or 30 separate engagements. The napalm burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel, incinerate organic material, and consume oxygen in enclosed spaces, suffocating defenders who survived the initial flames. CB technicians Kissel and Patterson would accompany the tanks to Iwo Jima, responsible for maintenance and emergency repairs under combat conditions. Their technical expertise proved essential. The CBH-1 system, while revolutionary, remained experimental. Field modifications would be necessary as combat revealed weaknesses in the design. The Marines selected to crew these experimental tanks underwent specialized training at Schofield Barracks. Tank commanders learned to identify cave entrances and fortified positions from moving vehicles. Gunners practiced flame projection angles and fuel conservation. Drivers trained to position tanks on the volcanic terrain that intelligence photographs suggested they would encounter. None of them fully comprehended how different Iwo Jima would be from previous Pacific campaigns. The 8 flamethrower Shermans landed at Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, designated D-Day in the operation plan. Navy landing craft deposited them on the black volcanic sand beaches, alongside standard Sherman gun tanks, Amtraks, and thousands of Marines. The tanks initially remained near the beachhead, crew chiefs conducting final mechanical checks, while infantry units pushed inland. At approximately 1000 hours, Japanese artillery opened fire from concealed positions in the interior. The pre-invasion bombardment, 74 consecutive days of naval shelling and aerial bombing, had failed to destroy Kuribayashi's underground fortress. Now Marines were paying the price for that intelligence failure. The first requests for flamethrower tank support came on D+1, February 20th. Infantry units advancing toward Airfield No. 1 had encountered a complex of reinforced pillboxes that resisted demolition charges and artillery fire. Machine gun positions, constructed from reinforced concrete and camouflaged with volcanic rock, commanded interlocking fields of fire across open terrain. Marines attempting to assault these positions were cut down before they could close to grenade-throwing distance. Tank commanders received coordinates and maneuvered their Shermans forward. The volcanic sand presented immediate problems. Tanks sank axle-deep in the loose ash, engines straining to maintain traction. Drivers learned to follow infantry tracks where the ash had been compressed by hundreds of boots. Progress was measured in yards per hour rather than miles. The first flamethrower tank engagement occurred at approximately 1400 hours on February 20th. A Sherman designated co-ed from the 5th Tank Battalion approached a pillbox that had stopped an entire rifle company's advance. The structure's gun slit, barely visible against the volcanic rock, faced down a natural depression that funneled attackers into a killing zone. Marines had already lost 24 men trying to reach it. Co-ed's commander, studying the position through his periscope, identified the optimal firing angle. He ordered his driver to position the tank hull down behind a slight rise, exposing only the turret and flamethrower nozzle. The gunner aligned his sights on the pillbox entrance. The range was approximately 150 feet, well within the weapon's effective envelope. When the flamethrower fired, napalm arced through the air in a stream of liquid fire. The yellowed gasoline struck the pillbox's concrete facade and flowed through the gun slit like burning water. Flames penetrated the interior, consuming oxygen and incinerating everything organic. Japanese soldiers inside faced an impossible choice: remain in the inferno or flee into Marine rifle fire. Most chose neither, dying at their posts as the napalm consumed them. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 minutes. Marines, who had been pinned down for hours, watched in stunned silence as the pillbox that had seemed impregnable simply ceased functioning as a defensive position. Word spread through the rifle companies with remarkable speed. The flamethrower tanks worked. By the end of D+1, battalion and regimental commanders were requesting flamethrower tank support for every cave and fortified position their units encountered. The problem was arithmetic: 8 flamethrower tanks supporting an assault force of 70,000 Marines across 8 square miles of fortified terrain. The tanks could not be everywhere simultaneously. Tank battalion commanders established a pooling system. The flamethrower Shermans would not be assigned to specific infantry units, but would respond to priority requests coordinated through division headquarters. This created an unexpected tactical dynamic. Infantry units began delaying assaults until flamethrower tanks could be brought forward. Commanders calculated that waiting for flame support, even for hours, resulted in fewer casualties than attempting frontal assaults against fortified positions. The tanks became the most requested weapon in the entire operation. Captain Frank C. Caldwell, company commander with the 26th Marines, later wrote that in his view, it was the flame tank more than any other supporting arm that won the island. Battalion after-action reports echoed this assessment. The 4th Tank Battalion reported that the flamethrower was probably the most valuable single weapon employed at Iwo Jima. The 23rd Regimental Combat Team stated that because of their great utility, more large flamethrower tanks should be provided. The 5th Tank Battalion called the new flame tank an extremely effective piece of equipment. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. These weren't hyperbolic assessments written to justify experimental equipment. They were operational conclusions drawn from watching Marines attempting assaults that flame tanks completed in minutes. The disparity between the weapon's effectiveness and its availability created a battlefield calculus unlike any previous Pacific campaign. Every commander wanted flame support, none could have it when needed. The psychological impact extended beyond American forces. Japanese defenders, trained to resist artillery, naval bombardment, and infantry assaults, had no doctrine for countering flame weapons. Their defensive positions, carefully engineered to provide protection from explosives, became death traps when liquid fire poured through gun slits and ventilation shafts. Kuribayashi's defensive strategy depended on Japanese soldiers holding fortified positions until death. Flamethrower attacks made such stoicism meaningless. Defenders died regardless of their courage or determination. February 23, 1945. The northern plateau of Iwo Jima, an area Marines had begun calling the meat grinder. Private First Class Dominic Tutelo, a 19-year-old demolitions man from the 24th Marines, crouched behind volcanic rock as Japanese machine gun fire tore through the air above his position. His M2 flamethrower, 70 pounds of fuel tanks and compressed nitrogen strapped to his back, made every movement awkward. Tutelo stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 126 pounds. The flamethrower weighed more than half his body weight, yet he had volunteered for this duty, trained for months at Camp Maui, and survived the disaster on D+1, when everyone in his squad except Sergeant Harlan C. Jeffrey and one other operator had been killed. Now Jeffrey was calling him forward, another cave position. The call came constantly. Wait for the request. Advance under covering fire. Project flame into the opening. Withdraw before Japanese counterfire could zero in. Tutelo had lost count of how many positions he had attacked. The routine had become almost mechanical, except for the part where enemy soldiers concentrated all available firepower on flamethrower operators the moment they revealed themselves. Marines swore the Japanese hurled mortar shells, not at units but at individual flamethrowers. The black smoke from burning diesel fuel created a signature visible across the battlefield. Every Japanese position within range would shift fire to that smoke cloud. The mortality rate among backpack flamethrower operators approached horrifying levels. One flamethrower unit on Iwo Jima would suffer a casualty rate of 92%. The average life expectancy of a flamethrower operator in combat was estimated at approximately 4 minutes of actual engagement time, yet volunteers like Tutelo continued advancing because the alternative, sending rifle companies in frontal assaults, killed even more Marines. Tutelo later recalled that his mind simply didn't think about the danger. "You're carrying a tank of napalm," he said, "but your mind doesn't think about that." The human capacity for psychological compartmentalization in combat was the only thing that made the mission bearable, Sergeant Jeffrey signaled. Tutelo moved forward in a crawling crouch, his flamethrower's nozzle preceding him. The cave entrance was approximately 25 yards ahead, cut into volcanic rock with Japanese precision. Gun slits flanking the main opening suggested a fortified position housing multiple defenders. Covering fire from Jeffrey's rifle kept Japanese soldiers from exposing themselves to shoot. Tutelo reached optimal range, approximately 15 feet from the entrance. At this distance, if he crawled closer, Japanese soldiers couldn't depress their weapons enough to hit him. If he crawled backward, they would kill him before he reached cover. He pressed the trigger mechanism. The flamethrower ignited with its characteristic whoosh. A stream of burning napalm arced through the air and disappeared into the cave entrance. The jellied gasoline splattered against interior surfaces, adhering to rock, equipment, and human flesh. The Marines attacking Hill 362 Alpha were supported by tanks and rocket-firing trucks, but the volcanic terrain limited armored vehicle mobility. Tanks that reached the hill's base were forced to navigate between boulders and across ravines that channeled them into Japanese kill zones. Several Shermans had been destroyed or disabled by Japanese anti-tank weapons. The gains measured in yards had cost hundreds of casualties. Then the flamethrower tanks arrived. On the morning of March 1st, 4 CBH-1 equipped Shermans moved forward in support of the 27th Marines' renewed assault. The tank commanders had studied the hill's defences through field glasses, identifying the primary cave complexes and fortified positions that anchored Japanese resistance. The approach required careful coordination between infantry, standard gun tanks, and the flamethrower Shermans. Infantry would fix Japanese defenders in place with suppressive fire. Gun tanks would engage visible positions with high explosive shells. Flamethrower tanks would move forward under this covering fire to engage cave entrances at close range. The first flamethrower Sherman reached firing position at approximately 0830 hours. The target was a cave complex halfway up the hill's northern face, identified by intelligence as a company-sized defensive position. The cave entrance was approximately 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, cut deep into volcanic rock with multiple interior chambers visible in aerial photographs. The Sherman's commander ordered his gunner to engage. The flamethrower discharged with a sound one Marine compared to a dragon's roar. Napalm arced through the morning air in a stream of liquid fire that seemed to move in slow motion. The jellied gasoline struck the cave entrance and poured inside like burning water flowing downhill. What happened next was visible to hundreds of Marines watching from positions across the battlefield. Flames erupted from every opening in the cave complex. Gun slits, ventilation shafts, and secondary entrances all suddenly expelled fire and smoke as the napalm flowed through the interconnected chambers. The fire consumed oxygen throughout the tunnel system. Japanese soldiers in the deepest chambers suffocated before the flames reached them. Those near entrances faced the choice between burning or fleeing. A few emerged, uniforms ablaze, and were cut down by Marine rifle fire. Most remained inside and died. The entire engagement lasted perhaps 90 seconds from the moment the flamethrower fired until the last Japanese soldier died. A defensive position that had held out for a week ceased to function in less than 2 minutes. 3 more flamethrower tanks engaged 3 more cave complexes over the next hour. Each engagement followed the same pattern: approach under covering fire, align on target, discharge flame, withdraw, while infantry secured the position. By 1000 hours, the primary defensive positions on Hill 362 Alpha's northern face had been neutralized. The hill fell to the 27th Marines by day's end, a victory achieved at a fraction of the casualties previous assaults had cost. Similar scenes played out across Iwo Jima's northern sector throughout early March. The Meat Grinder, Bloody Gorge, Turkey Knob, every terrain feature that American planners had marked as a Japanese strongpoint fell to combined infantry and flame tank operations. The pattern was consistent. Infantry would identify fortified positions, call for flame support, and then secure the positions after flames had cleared them of defenders. By mid-March, Japanese resistance was collapsing under the systematic application of fire. Kuribayashi's defensive strategy had anticipated American firepower superiority and planned accordingly. What he had not anticipated was a weapon that negated all advantages of fortified positions. His tunnels, carefully engineered with multiple levels and ventilation systems, became conduits for flame. His caves, positioned to provide protection from naval bombardment, became ovens when napalm poured through their entrances. His soldiers, trained to resist until death, died regardless of their courage when fire consumed the oxygen they needed to breathe. The irony was profound. Kuribayashi had studied American military doctrine, understood American material superiority, and designed defenses specifically to counter American advantages in artillery and air power. He had created the most sophisticated defensive system in Pacific War history. Yet a weapon he had not anticipated, one that existed in only 8 examples when the battle began, proved more effective at destroying his fortress than months of naval bombardment and aerial bombing. On March 26, 1945, Iwo Jima was declared secure. The battle had lasted 36 days, 3 times longer than American planners had estimated. American casualties totaled 26,000, including 6,800 killed in action. Japanese casualties approached 21,000, with only 216 taken prisoner. The battle was the only Pacific campaign in which American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties, testament to the effectiveness of Kuribayashi's defensive strategy. Yet without flamethrower tanks, American casualties would have been substantially higher. Post-battle analyses concluded that flame weapons had been the decisive factor in reducing Japanese fortified positions. The commander of the 5th Marine Division stated that events proved the flamethrower tank was the most important single weapon available to the division. The 4th Tank Battalion reported that the flamethrower was probably the most valuable single weapon employed at Iwo Jima. These assessments came from commanders who had witnessed every weapon system in the American arsenal employed against Japanese defenses. They had watched battleships shell the island for months. They had called in aerial bombing raids. They had directed artillery barrages and tank cannon fire. Yet the weapon they identified as most valuable was one that had not existed in functional form until months before the battle. 8 tanks, modified by Navy Seabees working against impossible deadlines, had proven more effective at destroying fortified positions than the entire pre-invasion bombardment. The technological and tactical implications would influence American military doctrine for generations. But in March of 1945, the immediate implication was simpler. Fire worked where explosives failed, and the men who brought that fire to Iwo Jima had fundamentally changed how America would fight the rest of the Pacific War. April 1, 1945, Okinawa. The largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War unfolded as more than 60,000 soldiers and Marines of the 10th Army stormed ashore on beaches that offered surprisingly light resistance. But American planners had learned from Iwo Jima. They knew what awaited them beyond the beaches. The Japanese 32nd Army, under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, had studied Kuribayashi's defensive strategy and applied similar principles to Okinawa's southern highlands: caves, tunnels, fortified positions on reverse slopes where naval bombardment could not reach them. An underground fortress designed to exact maximum American casualties. But the Americans arrived prepared with a weapon that Iwo Jima had proven decisive. The entire 713th Tank Battalion, 54 M4 Shermans, had been converted to flamethrower configuration by Seabees at Schofield Barracks under Colonel Unmacht's supervision. Unlike Iwo Jima, where 8 experimental tanks had to support the entire assault force, Okinawa would see mechanized flame weapons deployed at scale. The lessons of Iwo Jima had transformed American tactical doctrine in less than 2 months. The 713th Tank Battalion entered combat on April 7, 1945, and remained in continuous action for 85 days. The flame tanks conducted more than 600 attacks against Japanese defensive positions. They expended more than 200,000 gallons of napalm-thickened fuel, dousing caves, pillboxes, and fortified positions across Okinawa's rugged terrain. The psychological impact proved even more significant than the physical destruction. American troops, who had learned to dread assault operations against fortified positions, cheered whenever flame tanks advanced to lead the attack. The sight of these armored vehicles, bristling with flame projectors, created a sense of invincibility among infantry that had been absent in previous campaigns. Japanese defenders, by contrast, demonstrated terror when flame tanks appeared. Prisoners interrogated after the battle revealed that soldiers would abandon otherwise strong positions rather than face incineration. The fear was rational. Flame weapons offered no tactical response, no defensive countermeasure, no way to survive except retreat. The 713th Tank Battalion's after-action reports documented results that seemed almost impossible. In one instance, cited in official documents, a captain and sergeant used the tank's external hose extension to reach the top of an escarpment under covering fire. They killed several hundred Japanese soldiers with sustained flame projection, a feat that conventional weapons could not have achieved without prohibitive casualties. The battalion's casualty statistics told the story of flame weapons' tactical advantage. The 713th was credited with killing 4,788 Japanese soldiers and capturing 49 prisoners. American losses in the battalion totaled 8 killed or missing and 111 wounded. A kill ratio of 40-1, achieved against defenders fighting from prepared positions in favorable terrain. For comparison, infantry units assaulting the same positions suffered casualty rates approaching 30%. Back in Hawaii, the success at Iwo Jima and the ongoing operations at Okinawa triggered a procurement priority that demonstrated how completely flame weapons had transformed American planning. In June of 1945, Under Secretary of War Robert Patterson gave Colonel Unmacht's flamethrower tank production a AAA procurement priority, the highest designation in the American military industrial system. Only two other programs held similar priority: the B-29 Superfortress bomber and the atomic bomb project. Flame tanks, experimental weapons that had not existed in functional form a year earlier, were now considered as essential to American victory as strategic bombing and nuclear weapons. The implications for the planned invasion of Japan were profound. American planners projected that Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands, scheduled for November 1945, would require hundreds of thousands of American casualties. The Japanese would defend their homeland with the same fanaticism demonstrated on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but amplified by fighting for territory they considered sacred. Every fortified position would need to be reduced by assault. Every cave would require clearing. Every defensive position would be manned by soldiers who would fight until death. Flame weapons offered the only tactical solution that could reduce these fortifications without catastrophic American casualties. 72 additional flame tanks were under construction for Fleet Marine forces. Production schedules called for hundreds more to support the invasion. Seabees at Schofield Barracks produced more than 226,000 gallons of flamethrower fuel in preparation for Operation Downfall. The invasion never came. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The flame tanks built for the invasion of Japan would never see combat in their intended role, but the weapon system they represented, the tactical doctrine they embodied, and the industrial infrastructure created to produce them would influence American military operations for decades. The men who crewed the flame tanks at Iwo Jima and Okinawa returned home to a nation that had no conception of what they had experienced. Private Dominic Tutelo, who survived his 19-year-old baptism by fire on Iwo Jima, returned to civilian life carrying memories of crawling toward cave entrances with 70 pounds of napalm on his back. He rarely spoke about those experiences, a reticence common among flamethrower operators who understood that what they had done, however tactically necessary, represented warfare at its most primal and horrifying. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams, awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on February 23, 1945, when he single-handedly cleared multiple Japanese pillboxes over 4 hours of sustained combat, became one of the war's most decorated Marines. He would live until June 29, 2022, dying at age 98 as the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. Williams spent his post-war years working with veterans organizations, establishing Gold Star family memorial monuments, and occasionally speaking about Iwo Jima to audiences who struggled to comprehend the battle's horror. In interviews late in his life, he would describe crawling toward pillboxes, with bullets ricocheting off his flamethrower's compressed air tanks, understanding that a single penetrating round would transform him into a human torch. The technical innovations pioneered by Seabees at Schofield Barracks influenced mechanized warfare long after World War II ended. The CBH-1 and CBH-2 systems, designed under impossible time constraints by machinists and electricians who improvised solutions as they worked, established principles that would guide flamethrower tank development through the Korean War and into the early years of the Vietnam conflict. The coaxial mounting system developed in mid-1945, which allowed flame projectors to be installed alongside main armament rather than replacing it, became the standard configuration for Cold War-era flame tanks. The POACWS-HE-5 variant, which incorporated this design, remained in Marine Corps service through the 1950s. When the Korean War erupted in June 1950, American forces again encountered enemies fighting from fortified positions in mountainous terrain. The M4A3 Sherman flame tanks, updated versions of the Iwo Jima veterans, proved as effective against North Korean and Chinese positions as they had been against Japanese fortifications 5 years earlier. The tactical doctrine developed on Iwo Jima, using combined infantry and flame tank operations to reduce fortified positions, became standard operating procedure in Korea. But the legacy of Iwo Jima's flame weapons extended beyond tactical innovation. The battle had demonstrated a truth about modern warfare that American military planners spent the next decades trying to understand. Technological superiority alone could not guarantee victory against determined defenders fighting from prepared positions. The 74 consecutive days of naval bombardment before Iwo Jima's invasion had represented the longest preliminary bombardment in Pacific War history. Battleships and cruisers had fired thousands of tons of high-explosive shells into 8 square miles of volcanic rock. Army Air Force and Navy aircraft had dropped additional thousands of tons of bombs. The cumulative firepower exceeded anything previously directed against such a small target. Yet this overwhelming application of explosive force had failed to neutralize Japanese defenses because Kuribayashi had built his fortress underground, beyond the reach of conventional bombardment. Only flame weapons, which could flow through openings and penetrate fortified spaces, proved capable of destroying positions that bombs and shells could not reach. This lesson influenced American military thinking about nuclear weapons and strategic bombing. If conventional explosives could not destroy fortified positions, how effective would even nuclear weapons be against enemies who fought from underground facilities? The question became increasingly relevant during the Cold War, as both superpowers constructed hardened command centers and missile silos designed to survive nuclear attack. The Iwo Jima experience suggested that victory in future conflicts might depend not on the size of explosions, but on weapons capable of penetrating defended spaces. The human cost of learning these lessons remained almost incomprehensible. 26,000 American casualties on an island smaller than many American towns, 6,800 killed in action to capture 8 square miles of volcanic rock. The Marine Corps would call Iwo Jima the bloodiest battle in its history, a designation it retains 80 years later. The only Pacific battle in which American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties, evidence that Kuribayashi's defensive strategy had succeeded even in defeat. Yet the casualty figures, horrifying as they were, would have been far worse without flame weapons. Post-battle analyzers estimated that flame tanks had reduced American casualties by eliminating the need for frontal infantry assaults against hundreds of fortified positions. Every cave cleared by flame tanks represented dozens of Marines who did not be attempting to grenade or satchel charge their way inside. The commanders who wrote after-action reports praising flame weapons as the most important single weapon at Iwo Jima were not engaging in hyperbole. They were recording mathematical conclusions. Flame tanks killed more enemy soldiers per engagement, with fewer friendly casualties, than any other weapon system deployed on the island. The strategic significance of Iwo Jima itself remained controversial. The island provided emergency landing facilities for damaged B-29 bombers returning from raids on Japan, but only a fraction of the bombers that used Iwo Jima truly required emergency landings. Many used the island for routine refueling rather than emergency repairs. The fighter escort missions planned as Iwo Jima's primary justification proved largely unnecessary, with only 10 such missions flown during the war's final months. Some historians argued that Iwo Jima could have been bypassed, that the strategic value did not justify the casualties. But this analysis missed the battle's true significance. Iwo Jima was not important because of what the island provided, but because of what the battle revealed about the invasion of Japan that loomed on the horizon. If an 8-square-mile volcanic rock cost 26,000 American casualties to capture, how many casualties would the invasion of Japan's home islands require? American planners calculated that roughly 1/3 of troops committed to Iwo Jima had been killed or wounded. Similar casualty rates on Okinawa confirmed the pattern. If the Japanese defended their homeland with comparable determination, Operation Downfall might cost 1 million American casualties. This projection influenced President Truman's decision to use atomic weapons against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The alternative, a conventional invasion supported by the tactics proven at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, promised carnage on a scale that no democracy could sustain. Better to end the war with weapons that shocked the world than to send hundreds of thousands of young Americans into battles that would make Iwo Jima look moderate by comparison. The flame tanks built for Operation Downfall thus played a role in ending the war, even though they never fought in their intended campaign. Their very existence, and the tactical doctrine developed around them made clear that America possessed both the means and the will to systematically destroy Japanese defenses, regardless of cost. The projected industrial effort required to support Operation Downfall, including hundreds of flame tanks and millions of gallons of napalm, demonstrated American material superiority in terms even Japan's most determined militarists could not ignore. Today, scattered across museums and military installations, a handful of M4A3 Sherman flame tanks survive as artifacts of a technological revolution that occurred under the pressure of desperate necessity. The Mahaffey Museum at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, displays examples marked POACWS-1 and POACWS-5. Camp Lejeune recovered the Sherman designated Lucky, which served with Company C 5th Tank Battalion on Iwo Jima. These preserved vehicles, their flamethrower systems long deactivated, represent physical connections to a battle that fundamentally altered how America conducted warfare. The technical specifications that once were classified secrets, the welding techniques and electrical systems that Seabees improvised in Hawaiian workshops, the tactical doctrines written in marine blood on volcanic slopes, all have become historical curiosities, studied by military historians and preserved in archives. But for the men who lived through Iwo Jima, the flame tanks remained something more visceral than historical artifacts. They represented the difference between surviving and dying, between completing the mission and becoming another casualty statistic. The letters and memoirs left by Iwo Jima veterans consistently identified flame weapons as the tactical innovation that made victory possible. The anonymous Seabee electrician's mate who operated a flame tank for 20 days on Iwo Jima wrote that they accomplished in 6 hours, with 4 loads of fuel, what a tank battalion and 3 infantry companies had tried to do for 5 days. Infantry would sooner see 1 flame tank than a dozen with 75mm guns, he observed. This preference was not abstract military theory, but practical mathematics calculated in casualties avoided. The broader legacy of Iwo Jima's flame weapons extended into unexpected areas of American military development. The napalm mixture used in flamethrowers, refined and improved throughout 1945, became a standard incendiary weapon delivered by aircraft as well as ground systems. Napalm bombs dropped from fighter bombers in Korea, Vietnam, and subsequent conflicts traced their lineage directly to the Yelled gasoline developed for flamethrower tanks. The tactical doctrine of using fire against fortified positions, proven at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, influenced how America approached counterinsurgency operations and urban warfare through the end of the 20th century. The international controversy surrounding flame weapons and incendiary munitions, debates about whether such weapons violated humanitarian principles, began with the images and reports from Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Major General Clifton B. Cates, who commanded the 4th Marine Division at Iwo Jima, later stated he could not think of a more inhumane weapon than the flamethrower. This observation from a combat commander who ordered flame weapons employed hundreds of times captured the moral complexity of warfare pushed to its extremes. Flame weapons were horrifying, unquestionably. They killed in ways that violated every civilized instinct about proportionality and humanity in combat. Yet they also saved American lives by eliminating the need for close-quarters combat, where casualties ran highest. The men who carried backpack flamethrowers or crude flame tanks at Iwo Jima bore psychological burdens that accompanied them for life. They had employed weapons that reduced human beings to ash, that suffocated defenders in their fortifications, that created scenes of destruction so complete that even hardened combat veterans were shaken. Many flamethrower operators never discussed their experiences, carrying memories they could share with no one who had not witnessed similar horrors. The casualty rate among backpack flamethrower operators, approaching 92% in some units, testified to the courage required to advance with these weapons. Knowing that Japanese soldiers would concentrate all available firepower on flamethrower operators, that the black smoke signature would draw mortars and machine gun fire, that a single round penetrating the fuel tanks would cause instant incineration, these men still volunteered and advanced toward fortified positions because someone had to do it. Private First Class Dominic Tutelo's observation that his mind simply didn't think about the danger, while carrying 70 pounds of napalm, captured the psychological dissociation necessary to function in certain circumstances. Yet, 80 years after Iwo Jima, the fundamental tactical problem the flame tanks solved remains relevant. How do military forces reduce fortified positions defended by determined enemies without suffering catastrophic casualties? Modern warfare has developed precision-guided munitions, thermobaric weapons, and other technologies that claim to solve this problem with reduced collateral damage. But the basic challenge that confronted Marines on Iwo Jima, enemies fighting from underground positions beyond the reach of conventional explosives, continues to appear in conflicts from Afghanistan to Ukraine. The tactical lessons learned on that volcanic island, purchased with the lives of nearly 7,000 Americans, remain studied in military academies because the problems they addressed have not disappeared. We return now to where this story began. Private First Class Anthony Caserta crouching behind volcanic rock on February 20th, 1945, watching another cave entrance that would need clearing, the flamethrower on his back weighing 70 pounds, the knowledge that Japanese defenders would target him the moment he revealed himself, the calculation that advancing with liquid fire offered better odds than sending riflemen in frontal assault. In that moment, Caserta embodied the transformation that Iwo Jima forced upon American tactics, not the transformation American planners had anticipated, where overwhelming firepower would crush Japanese resistance through material superiority alone, but a different transformation, born from the realization that some fortifications could only be reduced by fire, that some enemies could only be defeated by tactics as uncompromising as their resistance. The 8 flamethrower Shermans that landed on Iwo Jima represented a technological solution to a tactical problem that naval bombardment and aerial bombing could not solve. Their success transformed them from experimental weapons into essential tools, from curiosities into the most requested support on the battlefield. Their legacy extended through Okinawa and into planning for an invasion of Japan that never occurred. They influenced how America fought in Korea, how military planners approached fortified positions, how tactical doctrine evolved to address enemies who fought from underground fortifications. The men who brought these weapons to Iwo Jima, the Seabees who built them, the Marines who crewed them, the infantry who followed them into cleared positions, all participated in a transformation of warfare whose implications echo into the present. They proved that fire could achieve what explosives could not, that tactical innovation could reduce casualties even in the bloodiest campaigns, that determination combined with technology could overcome even the most sophisticated defenses. The cost was measured in thousands of lives and memories that haunted survivors for decades, but the alternative, frontal assaults against Kuribayashi's fortress without the weapons needed to reduce it, would have cost far more. 8 flame tanks, 21,000 Japanese defenders, 11 miles of tunnels. 36 days of combat. These numbers tell only part of the story. The complete truth lies in the transformation they forced, the tactics they proved, the lives they saved and took, and the legacy they created that continues shaping how modern militaries approach the ancient problem of reducing fortified positions defended by enemies who will not surrender. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.